Township regular board meeting, February 11th, 2019. Let's begin with the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call.
Mr. Cummings.
Here.
Ms. McGuire, absent. Mr. Gasky, absent. Mr. Palmer.
Here.
Mr. Nordine here. Mr. Byer, absent. Mr. Weed.
Here. All right, we had a closed session scheduled. We have a shortage of board members, so closed session has been canceled. Next for agenda additions, does anybody have anything? All right, then we're on to public comments. For this first public comment period, there's a 4-minute time limit. A card must be filled out ahead of time and provided to the superintendent. When you come up to the podium, please introduce yourself. Do we have any cards?
We have one, Arnie LaRiche, the Air Force letter on the 16th of January with PFAS results and requests for a copy via email.
Good evening. Arnie LaRiche, Westwood Drive, Oscoda. 2 weeks ago at the Township meeting, Trustee Palmer shared with all of us a letter that he had received from the Air Force dated January 16th. He, as a property owner, gave access to the Air Force to install those special wells, which are an environmental sampling well of the PFAS in the groundwater, versus it is not a testing of personal drinking water, which the Department of Health holds as private until they share it with the owner. So there's a difference in the type of results. The number he gave us was 5,600 parts per trillion total PFAS. I think that's the only detail that you provided us, which is pretty significant. That well is some short distance away from the water.
About 20 feet.
About 20 feet, not very far.
Right.
So pretty close to where the water, groundwater flows into the lake. After the meeting, I asked Bill if he would mind sharing that data at a future date if I could not get it from the DEQ or the Air Force. And since I think you agreed with me that it was not personal information, I believe you said yes, you would. Subsequent to that, I went to the DEQ last Tuesday. I set up a meeting with the Sue Leeming's team, and I asked the DEQ to share those letters with me. They don't have them, and that's surprising, and probably something that, or not probably, I told Sue Leeming today, there's no reason why you shouldn't have those, because the DEQ requested those sampling sites specifically be made as part of the remediation program. They referred it to the Air Force. They have the data. The DEQ has the data electronically, but not the letters. But because of the dispute and everything, they're being super cautious on releasing data until, make sure it's QA'd and all that. So they referred it to the Air Force. I have not heard from the Air Force. I can request it directly from the Air Force, but I chose not to. I've got lots of other reports I want to ask the Air Force for. So my point is this. It's my understanding that you have one well as a private landowner. You have two.
There's 2 wells.
On your property. Okay, that's new. The township has 1 or 2 on the beach. Is that 2 of them?
I think 2.
And then there's another one, I think there's another private landowner that has them. My point is this, that information is very telling, because I knew that the DEQ had also done their own sampling on the beach where the plumes, one of the strongest plumes is coming off the base right now. And I had been talking for 2 weeks to get their data, and they were finalizing the report. That report was released last Friday because it was very important. We need the Air Force data. And so I sent an email on Friday to the township requesting that those letters be released to the public. I could not find them on the website, so I sent the email requesting those letters. Thank you.
Thank you. Anything on our cards?
I think we might.
Can we?
May I add, and I'm awaiting response.
All right. We have Kathy Woosterbarth about the U.S. Capitol?
Yes.
Visit?
Capitol visit.
Where is everybody?
The important ones are here.
That's right.
Well, I wanted to, and I apologize, I'm late, but I wanted to report that my visit to the Capitol with Congressman Kildee's invitation to the State of the Union was, a great honor, of course. Had the opportunity to do a lot that in one day on behalf of the residents in Oscoda, and to me was the greatest honor, was to be able to represent Oscoda and talk with legislators, environmental groups, other states. We met with legislators from Kentucky, Illinois, New York, and then other legislators from Michigan, and talked about PFAS. We talked about the task force that Dan Kildee has created. Right now, there's 23 states on it. Of course, I spent time promoting that with the other legislators when we were meeting informally before the State of the Union. And then had multiple interviews with ABC News and other media. But it really was a great opportunity for our community, I think, to get the word out about Wordsmith Air Force Base. Meeting with the Department of Defense, I asked Margaret Sullivan, and I'm sorry, her title escapes me. She's a deputy assistant director of something. So, but she said she wasn't familiar with Wordsmith Air Force Base because there are 400 sites that are contaminated, and she couldn't be familiar with all of them, of course. But we're the first, right?
Right.
Yes, so I would think that would be on her radar a little bit. So that was a little disheartening. I brought up the name Bob Delaney, though she was very familiar with that name. So I was glad about that. And then meeting with the EPA, the Office of Water, and then another pollution office. And I'm sorry, I don't have my notes with me to know all of their titles. But that again was a little frustrating, but I can assure you that the maps that are produced from the MDQ with the contamination of PFAS, total PFAS, PFOA, and PFOS, I put on their desks in front of them. And I said, look at these numbers. You have people that are walking through and swimming in foam. So there's other areas that have this tasteless, odorless, toxic substance in their waters, but we see it. It's in our backyard, and we need this cleaned up. So I said that both, of course, to the EPA and the DOD, in hopes that they would put, human faces, to the contamination. It was, I think it was a good opportunity for us, and I'm hoping that we'll keep those lines of communication open. Of course, they offered to, to be open with us, and I'm going to take them up on that offer. So it was my honor to do that. So.
Well, thank you.
Thank you for going.
It was amazing.
All right, now on to the consent agenda. Is there any questions on the minutes for January 25th, 28th, two of them on the 28th? Any comments regarding the payment of bills for $102,725.43?
I had one comment, not so much about what's in the payment of bills, but what wasn't in the payment of bills. I believe at our last meeting, we approved paying the MIC TV
Yes.
bills from the last several months of 2018. I did not see an MIC TV payment in any of these payments.
Can follow up on that.
Okay.
As a point, we made that question before. We were trying to follow up on it again. This is the second time we've had to follow up on those payments.
Any other comments? Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Support.
Motion by Mr. Cummings, support by Mr. Palmer. Roll call?
Mr. Cummings,
Yes.
Mr. Palmer,
Yes.
Mr. Nordine, yes, Mr. Weed.
Yes, motion is passed. Next, subcommittee reports and project updates. First one I have here is a bike path update. The one that I have is that we got approval for a $200,000 grant for the engineering on Phase 3, which goes from the school to Old Orchard Park. Did you have anything?
Just that Dave and I have been talking, we tried to make a call earlier today to Emily Meyerson, who's working on a grant on our behalf. And there seems to be a little bit of a holdup from Spicer, big surprise, as to some additional engineering costs because the original planning has been changed from what we're submitting now. And unless you heard later this afternoon from them.
I have not heard this afternoon. We've been following up to try to, we have a deadline of next Wednesday to submit for that TAP grant. And I'm just working with Spicer to be able to make sure that Emily gets everything she needs to be able to submit that TAP grant by next Wednesday, the 20th.
And just so you're all aware, usually we've had Spicer write these grants, but what's the name of the organization?
NEMCOG.
NEMCOG is going to do it for us for free for this project.
Nice.
One of the requests she had, that Emily had, was that we change in the grant proposal was increasing our input on the maintenance from $3,000 to $4,000. Just as she thought that would be a better representation, and we didn't feel that was a significant change that we thought that would be all right.
Oscoda Township maintenance of the path?
Our contribution to it, yeah.
I thought that the road commission was gonna maintain it once it was.
No.
No, the Iosco Exploration Trail
Oh,
Committee is getting donations for maintenance so they can work on maintaining it. So the county has agreed to own and maintain the Phase 1 portion of the path.
that's, okay, that's fine.
And in that, they have then contracted with the Bike Path Committee to do the funding and manage the maintenance of it, which then they will probably contract with the Road Commission to actually physically do the work.
So the township is going to contribute to the maintenance? Financially?
Not for Phase 1.
Not
For
for Phase
Phase 3,
Okay. Phase 3,
it doesn't look like it because, like I said, the goal of the committee is to be able to get enough donations to
Okay.
cover any cost for maintenance.
So in order to obtain the grant, we're saying that we'll pay for, ideally in the future, we might not actually have to
Right.
do that.
But that somebody will contribute funds into the maintenance.
That's what that's what we're saying.
Yes.
To the application of the grant, we're saying that there will be $4,000 worth of maintenance performed, not necessarily by the township?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sounds good. I try to keep up with this bike path deal when you guys bring it up. A lot of moving parts.
It's hard. It is a lot of moving parts. It changes almost daily, it seems.
All right, Road and Sidewalk Committee update.
We have a next meeting for the Road and Sidewalk Committee scheduled for Tuesday, the 26th at 11 a.m. here in the library. I was able to get some really good information about the lack of road funding in Michigan, specifically at the MME Winter Institute. I sent the board an email about that, and I followed up with the Road and Sidewalk Committee. You guys have a little bit more information about the initiative Finally Fix the Roads, which is a 12-county initiative in southeast Michigan trying to shame the Michigan legislators into providing more funding for the roads in comparisons to the other states. As far as other states with harsh winters, we don't even contribute half to the amount of road funding. So there's some information on that. The board might be seeing more information on that later.
All right, and the joint work session with Oscoda Township.
That is scheduled for next Friday here at 10 a.m. That's Friday, the 22nd, here at 10 a.m. And that is a joint work session with the Oscoda Township Board. We have several things to discuss. One being the proposal from UMBA associated with the sewer rate analysis. And then we'll be hearing from about the next steps, engaging the public with the first responders. And then we have a meeting with the county to discuss ambulance response times, and that is Tuesday, scheduled for Tuesday, March 5th at 9 a.m. in the county building.
All right, anything else for these?
I have a topic,
Yes.
if you're looking for a new one. So the update on the Township Hall recabling and phone upgrade, the contracts went to Mr. Eppert for review, and we met today at 3 o'clock to review the contracts. He asked questions. They're moving. They're making progress, but we're not done yet. So he'll be reaching out to the vendor with questions of his own. And when we get that finished, then I'll be back to the board to present, or Mr. Schaefer will be the board to present the contracts. We'll get the final approval.
All right, anything else? Then on to reports, the letter to the Iosco County Central Dispatch.
Right. The Oscoda Fire Department does not respond when Iosco County Central Dispatch provides notification of an electrical hazard that does not contain an actual fire. And this is based on the previously provided letter to Consumers Energy dated the 9th of November, 2018. Your packet contains a response from Douglas Van Essen with Silver and Van Essen, and that was dated the 17th of December, 2018. Explaining that the Iosco County Central Dispatch cannot honor the township's request. In response, the township has prepared a proposed response to the Iosco County Central Dispatch concerning this matter. Approval is being sought from the township board to send this proposed correspondence.
Comments?
I agree. I agree that we shouldn't be responding if there isn't a fire. I mean, we've been having this back and forth. This is now what I'm just guessing. This is the umpteenth time we've talked about this topic. And rather disheartened that when we had the Iosco County, the Township Association meeting, and Consumers was there and spoke, that they're really giving lip service to every one of us, and even blaming Oscoda for being having an effect on how they're managing phone lines and safety throughout the state, which I think is nothing to be ashamed of on our part.
Yep, I agree. For 20 years, they've been saying they'll improve their response times to down power lines, and they haven't. This is a statewide problem. They say that they are now actually making improvements, but, you know, that'd be great. We need to actually get that verified. They did say they did not like our idea of charging appropriate rates for them. They want us to charge what they think is appropriate. But what they think is appropriate, of course, is going to be more for the corporate level appropriateness than it is for the township community.
Great.
So pretty much if they're not willing to pay what we have to charge, and then why are we responding to lines that aren't a safety hazard on numerous occasions? I equated this to them at one meeting saying, when they said that they had a problem with us not responding, I told them that we are not the reserve workforce. They are a corporation, and with these being such a hazard, they need to take care of their own infrastructure. They said, but the children, what about children on their way to school who encounter a down power line? And I said to them, if you're so concerned about the children, then you would up your safety procedures on these. You would make sure your people can respond to them.
Right.
Tawas had a firefighter sit on a down line for over 24 hours. And that's just ridiculous. They need to take care of their stuff. Our taxpayers are paying into a fire department to respond to down power lines, that they're also paying an electric bill that's with the expectation that consumers will take care of their infrastructure and make sure power gets turned on for people as quick as possible and make sure it's safe. So really, the people are paying twice as long as they keep using fire departments as their response force. They said that if we're going to charge a rate, I feel an appropriate rate based on my calculations is $750 an hour for us to have to sit on a line, because we do have a lot of expensive equipment that has to go there. And we're taking on quite a bit of liability by doing so. And so I said, they said, well, you have to charge your residents that same rate then. And I said, there's a distinct difference between a resident and Consumers Energy. And that is that Consumers Energy, a line goes down, that line could be dead. So there's no hazard at all while that line is dead. And that's the equivalent of a homeowner dropping a cigarette on their wooden floor and then calling the fire department and saying, you know, I don't know if my house is going to catch on fire, but can you have a fire truck sit in my driveway for 8 hours just in case?
Mm-hmm.
And that's just not appropriate. So hopefully consumers will get all that resolved. Hopefully they'll do a better service. They say they will, but it's going to take some time. As one firefighter said, it's going to take some time to heal those wounds.
Yeah. Well, I would agree, and attended a meeting with Mr. Reed, with several other fire departments and Consumers Energy here a month or so, a little while ago, and was not encouraged by the the attitude of Consumers Energy, although they kind of said all the right things, but I didn't feel, just my gut reaction was that there was not a lot of sincerity there, but we'll see how that turns out. My only concern with this is the legal opinion that was provided in our packet last time. That seems to indicate that, and there's some case law that goes on that townships aren't able to, since the 911 is supposed to call the closest responding agency. I'm just a little concerned of what our liability might be under what was in that legal opinion. But I agree. I don't know how we get out of this loop unless we send a letter and stop responding, and hopefully Consumers takes the information and says, well, I guess we better change our ways here, because they certainly have the ability to do that. It's
None of all the legal research we've done, we've not found that the township has any liability on a down power line because it is a corporate-owned infrastructure.
well, in that legal opinion, it had to do with 911's responsibility and whether or not the townships or municipalities can designate who's going to respond or not respond. And I wasn't totally clear on that legal opinion that was provided to us. But I know that if we respond, then we are liable. I mean, there's no question then.
Correct.
If we go to the scene and something happens, then we certainly are then
Yep.
liable. And with a down power line, if it's live, there really isn't anything that our firefighters can do
No.
other than jump back out of the way and try and keep people away from it. That's the poor children that might be walking through. So I guess it would be appropriate to send the letter. I do have some concerns about the legal opinion that was expressed.
And so, obviously, that legal opinion was sent to the township attorney for his review, and this letter was drafted based on conversations with the township attorney. And so, you know, that legal opinion wants to try to push liability onto the township associated, and, you know, obviously that is the opinion of the attorney for the 911 dispatch center, and so this is obviously a response to that, short and sweet.
And I will note that the case law that was cited had to do with a legal case that had to do with a city with 2 fire departments, and the city wanting to designate which fire department they were going to send. And that's a little different situation than what we have here. So
Yeah.
I'm fine with sending the letter to 911. That was my only concern, was that the language that was in that legal opinion was a little questionable, so.
I want to add in that our volunteer fire department needs support, our support, and I don't feel at all that sending them out to babysit a downed power line where there is no fire, where they could potentially be sitting there for 24 hours in the worst case, as it was with Tawas, that is a duress situation. In fact, it's a job endangerment situation for some of these folks who have jobs the next day to have to get up to go to. I am simply not in favor of the game that is being played at the county level. There we are. And I'm adamantly opposed to Consumer Power's position, to be blunt.
All right, any other comments?
Only that if we can all agree, we are looking for a suitable solution to this problem, and if sending this letter gets us down that road, I'm for it. I have some hesitancy in some of the things. It's just not a great situation we find ourselves in, but if this gets us closer to an adequate solution that's reasonable, then I'm for sending the letter. And hopefully we'll find ourselves there sooner than later.
Is there a motion?
All right, so I move that we send the letter that was drafted by Mr. Reppert to the Iosco County Central Dispatch.
Support. Motion by Mr. Cummings, support by Mr. Weed. Roll call?
Mr. Cummings,
Yes.
Mr. Nordine, yes. Mr. Palmer,
Yes.
Mr. Weed.
Yes, motion's passed. Next, professional services agreement with Beckett and Rader.
Right, at the January 14th Township Board meeting, approval was obtained to move forward with a $17,530 proposal from Beckett and Rader to implement form-based code for the Township's B1 district. Your packet contains the proposed professional services contract agreement with Beckett and Rader to move forward with this plan for implementation. This professional services contract agreement requires approval from the Township Board, and we have a, if approved, we would be moving forward this month, where John from Beckett and Rader would be available on the 27th of this month at 10 a.m. to start the form-based code kickoff meeting.
Comments? Is there a motion?
I'll move to approve the professional service contract with Beckett and Rader in the amount of $17,530 to implement form-based code in the B1 district.
Support.
Motion by Mr. Palmer, support by Mr. Cummings. Roll call?
Mr. Palmer,
Yes.
Mr. Cummings?
Yes.
Mr. Nordine, yes. Mr. Weed?
Yes, motion's passed. Next, RFP for tree trimming and removal.
All right. The concept of issuing an RFP for tree trimming and removal services has been discussed with both the DPW and Old Orchard Park. There's a sizable amount of work to be done, and the township is proposing to take sealed bids for the tree trimming and removal services. This process is being designed to not conflict with camping season at Old Orchard Park. So your packet contains the proposed RFP for tree trimming and removal. The RFP for tree trimming and removal requires approval from the township board.
Comments?
I do. I was under the impression from conversations with Alipsidis, Director of Parks and Rec, that the property which we're leasing from consumers, known as Old Orchard Park, trees are maintained by their arborist or something along those lines, something extremely, where they practically have every tree named and numbered kind of thing. Can you speak to that and whether
Sure.
this is going to be a problem?
So what happens is they go out there, both Al and Gary mark the trees that they are proposing to be able to trim and or remove. And so then, once they're all marked, they contact consumers. Consumers' arborist comes out and says, yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. And the yeses stay marked, and then that is what will be presented. But there is a sizable amount of work to be able to trim and remove and stump grind and chip and cut for firewood out there.
Was that number correct? 175 stumps that need to be?
Wow.
I know,
That's-
and the snow that's coming is not gonna help our cause to be able to see those stumps, but, we can direct them on the tour, the general vicinity of where they're gonna be.
That alone is a lot of work.
No kidding.
Yeah?
And didn't we have a contract before for tree trimming? It seems to me,
No, we were working on one. I mean, every time we needed a tree cut, we would contact 3 tree trimming services, get bids, and get the tree taken care of. So it's a pretty time-consuming, burdensome process. We've been trying to work on getting a truck contract established. That got dropped, I think, a year ago, and now we're doing it again.
recollection was that we had worked on that before, and it seems to me that we either didn't get any response or didn't move forward with it or something.
I was having similar recollections as to where, I was wondering where we had left the process previously, because I knew we had engaged the process before.
Right.
I had the same question. And there's a chart here in the RFP that lists the cemetery, Township Hall, Beach Park, Ratliff Park, and Old Orchard Park. The Beach Park and Ratliff Park don't have numbers of trees to be trimmed or removed or stump removals. Are there going to be trees at the Beach Park or Ratliff Park that...
Not at this time.
Okay, all right.
You can see the main is Old Orchard Park is where obviously a lot of the work needs to get done.
And I recall having discussions in the past about the beach park needing to be trimmed, but I wonder if we didn't do that in a one-off contract, similar to what you referenced earlier. But I trust Mr. Hamlin's
I don't think we have for
estimation. No?
the last year.
Over the boardwalk, I know there was requests or comments made to suggestions that we trim the trees hanging over the boardwalk, but like I said, I do not want to overstep into I trust Mr. Hamlin's judgment of such matters. And my only other suggestion would be about the insurance requested in the RFP is $1 million, single limit of $1 million, and an aggregate limit of $2 million. I know that's typical for most contracts we do, but there's later in the packet we have much more benign service being performed and a requesting of insurance coverages of much higher, like $5 million and one limit or something. I just wonder if we might not ask. It seems like a relatively risky endeavor that we might want. request additional insurance coverage by the provider.
Okay. Is there a suggestion as far as?
I don't have a suggestion. This is not, I don't usually find myself being the one pointing out lack of insurance coverage, but it's not usually my area of comfortability, so I'd be picking numbers out of the air. I guess they'd be pretty arbitrary coming from me. So, and I'm not suggesting that we do. I'm raising the question to see if any other board members feel similarly or have suggested.
I only noted that it was twice the usual, because usually we have 1 million per occurrence, 1 million limit. And so I was noticing that it was twice, which I thought was a good indicator, but I didn't have a feeling like it was too little. I know there's a lot of work going on, but I don't know. I mean, I don't think we even actually ask that much from our contractors in the professional services contracts. I don't think we usually get exceedingly high numbers of insurance from them either.
Yeah, no, and again, I'm not usually.
But I don't remember what they were.
So the thing that, having two of them in one packet, the professional services agreement later with Alert Janitorial has a $2 million single limit and a $5 million aggregate limit, and that's for, that might be a VA requirement.
Probably.
So,
That is correct.
but for custodian work versus cutting trees, it just seemed disproportionate.
I
Well,
agree.
yeah.
I mean, $1 million was good for 10 years ago, but I think we're getting to the point where the insurance probably does need to be more.
So, would you say 2, 2 and 4?
2 and 4 or 2 and 5. I don't know how the insurance company has their steps set up.
Yeah, if I could suggest when you ask the vendor when the last time was they had their insurance coverage reviewed. Just maybe that would be a question to ask them. And then I think we need to be prepared that it'll probably create an increase in cost.
All right, any other comments? Is there a motion?
I would move to approve submitting an RFP for the tree trimming and removal services,
Does that include any insurance changes?
including evaluating the need of the insurance in that proposal.
Does your motion defer to Mr. Schaefer's judgment?
Yes.
Good, then I support.
Motion by Mr. Palmer, support by Mr. Cummings. Roll call.
Mr. Palmer,
Yes.
Mr. Cummings,
Yes,
Mr. Nordine, yes, Mr. Weed.
Yes, motion's passed. Acceptance of the $580,000 Michigan Enhancement Grant from MEDC.
Right. I'm happy to report that the township has the opportunity to accept $580,000 grant from the MEDC, the Michigan Enhancement Grant. Your packet contains an email sent 2/1/19 from Kristen Blackmer with the MEDC. The three attachments in the email are the grant application, the project budget, and a description of the Michigan Enhancement Grant process. And so within there, the packet contained the blank forms I was able to provide you this evening based on Rowe Engineering. Rick Freeman was able to email the completed ones over this afternoon, and that had the grant application as well as the project budget for your review and approval.
Comments?
and from the packet, this is about the connection costs for Phase 1 and Phase 2? Is that what the money would be used for, or could it be used for other things as well?
The way Rick has that set up in the project budget, and we are fortunate in this one, the money does not have to be spent until December 31st, 2021. So, it's the water and sewer, infrastructure there, the special legislative grant. He's got the $580,000 in there, for the, to supplement the ECWAG, USDA, rural development, and the special appropriations.
I think it's January 31st of 2021.
Yes, you are correct.
Okay, good, yeah, 2 years. Okay,
Yep,
good.
January 31st, 2021.
If we reject the grant, could we hold out for a little more?
I won't hold your breath, Bill.
I'm kidding.
And obviously, this has not been formally reviewed by Mr. Eppert. So if there would be a motion for the clerk and the supervisor to sign based on final review, legal review from Mr. Eppert.
Before you ask for more money, I move that we accept the MDEC grant for $580,000
Support.
with approval from Mr. Eppert.
I do have one question. There was on the grant application form, it said, where was it here? If the grantee has been a recipient of grant funds under one or more prior grant agreement, and it lists the whole bunch, then we might be not eligible for this, and I don't know, and didn't have the chance to look at each of those public acts that you could have received money under, but it was just a question as to whether we've received any of that.
Received any of that?
Received any money under, so if the grantee is also a recipient of grant funds under one or more of prior grant agreement authorized by any of PA 268 of 2016, Public Act 107 of 2017, and/or Public Act 207 of 2018, we must first certify in writing to the grant administrator that all such grant funds have dispersed thereunder have been expended as required under the applicable prior grant agreement before any grant funds from Public Act 618 of 2018 may be dispersed to the grantee. So I don't know if that 325 we got for service leads falls under anything similar to this, and if we still have that money, if it's gonna preclude us from
I
being
wouldn't think
eligible.
so, since the
Well,
legislation's approved that we do get this money.
I can verify.
I would hope
Alright.
so, yeah, I just would not want to
Right.
jump up and fight us.
Did I call out the motion? Motion by Mr. Cummings, support by Mr. Weed. Roll call.
Mr. Palmer,
Yes.
Mr. Nordine, yes. Mr. Cummings,
Yes.
Mr. Weed.
Yes, motion's passed. Modification to the process for Phase 1 water service installation bids.
Right. So again, this was the front and back. It's a two-sided amendment that I printed in color here. This is amendment number 1 for the advertisement of bids for the water service installation. We had a pre-bid meeting, and based on that discussion and clarification, the answers that were provided to the contractor that showed up, we wanted to better make those modifications and provide an extended timeline based on a request from the contractor that attended the meeting. So that's what you'll see in there on in red at the bottom. The time frame has been pushed back, and the bids will be received up until 3 p.m. on March 1st, 2019. And if this is approved, obviously, I would be re-advertising this in the paper with the addendum.
Comments? Or motion?
I'll move to approve the proposed modification of the bid process for the Phase 1 water service connection.
Support.
Motion by Mr. Palmer, support by Mr. Cummings. Roll call.
Mr. Palmer,
Yes.
Mr. Nordine, yes. Mr. Cummings,
Yes.
Mr. Weed.
Yes, motion's passed. Professional services contract agreement with Alert Janitorial.
All right, so the contract with Alert Janitorial has expired. Your packet contains the professional services contract agreement with Alert Janitorial, the VA janitorial service scope of work, and the VA janitorial service scope of, the actual task performed. The information provided is very similar to what the Township Board approved in June of 2016, and this proposed agreement requires Township Board approval.
Comments?
I believe the cost is the same as the prior contract, too.
Correct.
Didn't go up.
I make a motion, we go forward with contracting with Alert Janitorial.
Support.
Motion by Mr. Weed, support by Mr. Cummings. Roll call?
Mr. Cummings,
Yes.
Mr. Palmer,
Yes.
Mr. Nordine, yes. Mr. Weed.
Yes, motion's passed. 2019 Oscoda Strategic Plan.
All right, the final version of the 2019 Oscoda Strategic Plan was provided to the Township Board, and your packet contains the final version with the updated mission, vision, and 7 strategic goals. I've also established next steps for the Oscoda Township strategic planning process. Joe Borgstrom is scheduled to come back up for a public presentation of the 2019 Oscoda Strategic Plan on Thursday, the 21st of February at 6 p.m. in the Warrior Pavilion. That will be followed by meetings with the steering committee on the 28th of February, the 13th of March, and the 27th of March. Those 3 meetings are all going to be held here at the library at 1:30 p.m. This is where I believe previous plans have kind of fallen by the wayside. We didn't generate an actions agenda / implementation matrix stating who is going to do what by when. And based on those 3 meetings, what I am envisioning is at the 228 meeting, we kind of go through the first 4 overarching strategic goals, and I get that input, come back with modifications or changes on the 13th of March, go over the last 3 goals, so that by the 27th of March, we can have an approved document that can be presented to the Planning Commission. If the Planning Commission approves that, then it would be come back to the Township Board for approval. What we're envisioning is that eventually the mission, the vision, the strategic goals, the implementations matrix will serve as updates or a refresh to the master plan that was approved March of 2018. And obviously, this is part of the RRC certification process. This is a requirement.
Comments?
Just one clarification, we have Wednesday, March 28th. March 28th is actually a Thursday.
Thursday, March 28th.
Okay.
Yep.
Is there a motion?
I'll move to approve the proposed work sessions at the date stated.
Support? Motion by Mr. Palmer, support by Mr. Weed. Roll call.
Mr. Cummings,
Yes.
Mr. Palmer,
Yes.
Mr. Nordine, yes. Mr. Weed.
Yes, motion's passed. Scheduling work sessions for next steps in strategic planning process, which is
So the previous item was to approve the 2019 Oscoda strategic plan. And so what I was hoping to be able to do is get the board to formally approve the final version of the 2019 Oscoda strategic plan.
okay. Do we have comments regarding the strategic plan itself? Is there a motion for the strategic plan?
I would move to approve the 2019 Oscoda strategic plan.
Support.
Motion by Mr. Cummings, motion by Mr. Palmer, support by Mr. Cummings. Roll call.
Mr. Nordine, yes. Mr. Cummings,
Yes.
Mr. Palmer,
Yes.
Mr. Weed.
Yes, motion's passed. Anything else on the strategic plan? All right. Establish Township Board representation on the CIP policy program.
All right, so I've communicated the proposed changes to the township's capital improvements planning process for 2019 and beyond. Your packet contains a very long email from me on the 27th of January explaining the capital improvements planning process I envision for 2019 and beyond. The main difference for the CIP process is meeting the requirement for both the Planning Commission and the Township Board to approve the annual updates for the CIP. Based on the Redevelopment Ready Communities CIP guide provided by the MEDC, the Planning Commission voted to appoint 2 members to the CIP policy group and established a meeting for the 22nd of February at 2 p.m. in my office. The CIP guide recommends that the treasurer, clerk, and another representative of the governing body also serve on the policy committee. And so right now, next Tuesday, the department heads owe me all of the requests to be added to the CIP. And I'm going to be presenting that to the policy group that is going to be made up of 2 members of the Planning Commission, and then the treasurer, the clerk, and another representative from the Township Board. And we're going to rank and go over the requested projects or purchases submitted by the department heads to update the capital improvements plan.
Comments? Volunteers?
I would be happy to work on it, but I'm going to be out of town the rest of the month, so, and I don't want to hold up the process.
And you're already on there, Jim.
Yeah. Just gonna clear that up, yeah.
We gonna duke it out?
There's 3 people.
I'll
Don't you
volunteer.
normally nominate somebody who isn't here?
Yeah, you can obligate. You got 3 people you can obligate, yeah.
I'm looking at all these work sessions and going, some of us have a day job that's not a government employee.
I volunteer for that.
Thank you.
Thank you. I owe you one.
All right, I make a motion that Mr. Weed is the representative on the CIP Policy Committee.
Support.
Motion by Mr. Weed, support by Mr. Palmer. Roll call.
Mr. Palmer,
Yes.
Mr. Nordine, yes. Mr. Cummings,
Yes.
Mr. Weed.
Yes, motion's passed. Establish Township Board representation. Darn it. Another one messed me up on my spaces here. All right, on to ordinances. Amendments to Civil Infraction Ordinance 222-1.
Okay, so out of the first 4 items for the resolutions and ordinances, the first 4 all go together. And these updates have been a collaboration between the zoning administrator, the new code enforcement officer, the police chief, the township attorney, and myself. And so we have several different ordinances, and this was an opportunity to update these appropriately and solidify the process for how we are going to deal with these issues moving forward. And so this is a process that we have been working with the district court as well to be able to get them on board with what we want to see and the outcome of this process. So this has been several months in the making to be able to update these different ordinances. And obviously, the civil infraction ordinance, the previous one referred to a bureau at the Township Hall. And so we found it would be much more effective than instead of having these infractions solved at Township Hall by paying a ticket, to go straight down to the courthouse, where the remedy would be much quicker.
Comments?
What,
Sure. Go ahead.
what has been changed, like for the civil infractions, is it just the removal of the bureau and converting that straight to the courthouse, or what?
Correct, and so the code enforcement officer is no longer writing tickets that direct the individual with the infraction to Township Hall. This is now being directed to, based on there's obviously a notice, and so remedies are being proposed prior to any ticket being issued. And so if those remedies aren't taken care of, then we simply issue the infraction, the ticket, and then they go to the courthouse to be able to set a court date or pay the ticket.
And that's the only change for the civil infractions ordinance from this
And
one?
removing the references to the Civil Infractions Bureau.
The bureau is the
Bureau
change.
within
Okay.
Township Hall.
Is there a motion?
I'll move to approve the amendments to the civil infraction ordinance 222-1 as presented.
Yeah, support.
Motion by Mr. Palmer, support by Mr. Cummings. Roll call?
Mr. Palmer,
Yes.
Mr. Nordine, yes. Mr. Cummings,
Yes.
Mr. Weed,
Yes, motion's passed. Amendments to Blight Control Ordinance 205, Section 8-131.
All right, again, this goes into, in conjunction with both the civil infractions ordinance and the junk car. These were revised to be able to have the similar language and processes between the three ordinances. And so, obviously, the updates reflect consistent language between the three ordinances presented.
Comments? Is there a motion?
I move that we approve amendments to blight control ordinance 205, section 8-131.
Support. Motion by Mr. Cummings, support by Mr. Weed.
I have one similar question.
Go ahead.
The change here is just the wording to make them consistent with the other two. There's no changes to requirements of.
If you look at section 8 for enforcement, this updates the actual titles of the individuals that can enforce, as far as the township zoning administrator and/or a code enforcement officer and/or Oscoda Township police officer. Those are updating section 8 as well, as far as who is able to enforce.
Okay.
Roll call.
Mr. Cummings,
Yes.
Mr. Palmer,
Yes.
Mr. Nordine, yes. Mr. Weed,
Yes, motion's passed. Amendments to Dismantled Junk Car and Unregistered Vehicle Ordinance 2006-234.
Okay. The main change within this one is in section 2/3. And this is the definition of a junked, inoperable, wrecked, or abandoned motor vehicle. Number 3 says, which has not borne a valid and current license plate and/or registration. After that, there were words that said within 1 year, which basically, if somebody did not have a valid registration, then they could have a year to rectify that situation. And so, we see that time frame as a little bit excessive to provide somebody an entire year with an invalid registration before pursuing any civil infraction. This is the most common as far as to junked vehicles.
Comments?
Yeah, I do have a question. So how does this apply to a vehicle in storage?
In a storage facility.
Yep.
So like a storage unit.
Yeah.
Or like
yeah.
a garage.
Yeah, well, it wouldn't necessarily be covered. I mean, we have a number of open storage facilities here with vehicles that are in them, whether they be recreation vehicles, larger campers, trailers, cars, trucks. And so I was just wondering, how does this apply to them? Because I know that, if your vehicle is in storage and it's a seasonal vehicle, so maybe something specifically for summer or specifically for winter, it can fall out of registration for a period of time because of the date you pick is not necessarily lining up with the season, So I was just wondering, what does it do in those cases? It's still private property because it's owned by another company or individual. What are we dealing with there?
And usually in a situation like that, you've signed a contract associated with that storage and there's an agreement for that.
Yep.
So usually if you don't pay your storage rent, then that
That's a different
then
story.
becomes their property.
Right, sure.
Most of those storage facilities are gated and
Yep.
it's not like code enforcement could get in there or really enforce. What this is mainly trying to deal with is the inoperable cars that are not that are out in private residencies.
So I'm just going to add a comment, because I think the work that's done here is good, and I appreciate the words that were removed. But here's the scenario in Michigan. So if you have a seasonal vehicle, and you remove the insurance from that vehicle, in other words, keep it just down to your basic liability, something like that. You're not intending to drive it or use it. So you can't get your tags renewed by the state of Michigan Secretary of State's office until the insurance has been restored on that vehicle. I go through this every year, and so I'm wondering how that, with the state, is going to make this difficult to enforce, because the wording, though we've simplified it, we've made it difficult to figure out, well, if somebody's tags are simply not renewed, but it's because it's off-season, and in a few months it's going to be fine, how do we deal with that? I guess my concern here is I already feel like enough of us in the state of Michigan are harassed by this strangeness that the Secretary of State's office has been doing. Do we need to make it worse? And I realize we're trying to do the right thing here. So that's why I'm asking the question.
Are you talking about a vehicle on private property, on your property, or in
I
a
am.
storage facility?
Either one, doesn't matter here.
Well, part of that, if you look at section 3 purpose under number 1 at the bottom, it says, however, cars otherwise lawfully upon the premises of a person/business licensed appropriately doing business with storage, this would be exempt.
Got it.
So to your
That
point
does
about
carry that
vehicles in storage facilities,
Right,
that would
right.
not apply.
That's good. Thank you. I didn't see that earlier. Thanks, Bill. Okay.
So we do have this line in here, doing business selling used and or new cars are exempt.
Right, that would make sense too.
Maybe we should include storage in there, doing business selling. selling used new cars or storage are exempt from the provisions thereof. But we need to clarify here in doing business is qualifying that for ensuring that is a permitted business. So it's not just somebody who wants to turn their home yard into a storage business.
Right.
So adding
We need to make sure
doing permitted business?
something along those lines. Probably need to get a little attorney language in there to make sure that we've covered our bases on that one.
These were drafted by the attorney.
But I just want to make sure that this is clear to a resident that we're covering our loopholes here. Now, what I say about the attorney language is that when it comes to storage, there's a difference between like an impoundment yard or a storage facility for cars. There's certain limitations that come with storing vehicles on a business property. Bill can probably speak to that more than I can regarding, like if a tow facility had a lot to put vehicles on.
Right.
There's limitations as to how long that vehicle can be there, and
Right.
so that they don't end up with a car junkyard over time.
Sure.
Yeah, and in section 2.2, sub 3, just the fact that it's, that a vehicle is not borne a valid or current license plate or registration is exactly where we end up falling with recreational vehicles. It doesn't make them junk or inoperable or wrecked or abandoned. That's what I'm not understanding here. So.
Typically, the recreational vehicles are registered. They'll have
Yes,
a permit.
I get that, but the way this is worded, it says, which has not borne a valid and current license plate, which would be a tag, would make that current, and or registration. So neither of those are current if your tag is expired.
If it's expired, yeah.
That's what I'm saying. And there we have our recreation vehicle problem. That's exactly what the state of Michigan Secretary of State's office has been messing with everybody for the last few years here. We can't get our tags. We can't renew our tags when we want to go and we have to then pull our recreation vehicles out of storage, essentially, by putting insurance back on them when they're out of season in order to get the tags from the Secretary of State's office. And if you don't, you pay a penalty, a late fee for doing that, for pulling them out late because you missed your registration date.
What do you mean by pulling them out?
If you're in storage, you are probably going to decrease your insurance on that item. Do you understand?
Okay.
Whether it be a car or a snowmobile or whatever, right? You're gonna take it down to just putting it into storage. It'll be a reduced insurance. So, depending on when your insurance renews, if you don't renew it just because your insurance renewal date comes up, like let's say today, for a summer vehicle, I either defer today to keep it, just pay the minimum insurance again today, and I don't renew my license plate tags until the summer when I'm ready to go pull this out. It'll be some months down the road after the deadline, and the Secretary of State will assess a penalty for those tags being late and renewed. I will also at that point have to put full insurance on it to get those tags, and I'll have to go in there with my proof of insurance as well. But the point is that because of this new game that the Secretary of State has been playing for the last several years, you get penalized for this, and you can't get the tags renewed without full insurance. And I'm just saying, if people are dealing with seasonal vehicles, seasonal toys, right? That they're going to have a gap here in number 3, and that's what I'm asking about. I still see that as a loophole, because everyone isn't using an official storage business. It could be in their backyard. You see?
You're
This
talking
is-
about a vehicle, though.
Yeah, it could be a snowmobile. It could be a vehicle. I mean, I have a vehicle that's summer only.
But if you maintain a current registration on the vehicle,
And/or, it's not current if it's expired. Your registration is the piece of paper associated with your tag. It renews with your tag.
understand.
That's what would make it current.
But I thought you were talking about you would put it in storage to reduce your insurance.
Okay. You do. You're right. That's correct. You would.
Okay.
And then you can't renew your tag because with that, unless you turn your insurance fully on again. You can't renew the tag. You can't go to the Secretary of State's office and say, I'm on minimum insurance. You have to have everything on it, or a collision, exactly, thank you, to be able to drive it, so that you could then get your tags renewed. So what we're making here is we're making a little bit of a complexity here. We're kind of penalizing people with toys.
I don't think that
And since
applies
since
to
it seems to be a
anything other than
confusion, and I
cars.
think I know best on this one, I'm going to say we defer this because I don't understand the problem either. I understand exactly what I go through every year for the years I've been living here in Oscoda, and since the Secretary of State's been pulling this on me.
All right, I
that
make a
I think we need to
motion,
just put
I
this
make a
off.
motion, we postpone ordinance 2006-234 till the next meeting.
Okay.
Is there support?
Support.
Motion by Mr. Weed, support by Mr. Cummings. Roll call.
Mr. Nordine, yes. Mr. Cummings?
Yes.
Mr. Palmer?
Yes.
Mr. Weed?
Yes, motion's passed. Next, resolution 2019-06, adopting civil infraction ordinance. There we go again. Well, no, this one's for 06, so both
Yes,
of these?
You're right.
Both of these are to be deferred till the next meeting.
Correct.
All right, I make a motion that we postpone resolution 2019-06 till the next meeting.
Because it's dependent on the other, right?
Yes.
Thank you. Yeah, support.
Roll call.
Mr. Palmer?
Yes.
Mr. Nordine, yes. Mr. Cummings?
Yes.
Mr. Weed?
Yes, motion's passed. Amendments to zoning ordinance 165.
Right. So what you'll see in your packet is a memo from the zoning administrator. And what these amendments outline, the planning commission read the ordinance revisions at the November 5th, 2018 meeting and voted unanimously at the December 3rd, 2018 public hearing. The proposed ordinance sections were sent to the county on December 20th, 2018, and after the 30-day wait, there were no objections to these amendments. And the revisions are the new definitions for assisted living facility, assisted living group facility, and independent housing facilities. There were changes to the WB3, the Wordsmith Business District special permit uses, and then changes to the principal and special land uses in the RT, Residential Tourist District.
Comments?
Yes, there aren't page numbers on the actual ordinance itself, so on the PDF that we're all looking at as board members, on page 158, it's in section 3 under special uses. There seems to be a stray number 1 sitting there that looks like we've started a new numbering system.
Gotcha.
That's it.
Any other comments?
Did we discuss this at the last meeting? In January 28th, so winter?
It was not on the agenda, we put it on for the next one.
Did we, that was one of the ones we
Postponed.
deferred? That's,
Yep.
There were other ones last time for 165.
there were other ones. Okay.
Yeah, we've seen this
Yes.
before.
165 is the zoning, you are gonna
Yeah.
see a
Oh,
ton
yeah,
more to
certainly.
the,
It's-
to the
it's-
zoning ordinance as we get Muni code updated here.
Yep. The one that sticks out to me is the changes in the RT. Let me get there. The change to the publicly owned and operated parks, parkway, and other publicly owned outdoor recreational facilities, because I had asked a question about that last time. It's on here again. I don't have a problem with it. We discussed it last time. I just was curious as to if we were duplicating or not.
No, to that point, what we did is not eliminate that, but move it to special permitted use. Which if you look at some of the other zoning districts, the R4, R3, all of them list publicly owned and operated parks, but they're all in special
So it's more
permitted
consistent.
uses. So it's
Yeah.
just making it a little more uniform.
Yeah, in my recollection from the last meeting, the discussions, that makes sense, especially with the explanation of the more consistency. My question was, still is about the publicly owned nature of it, and I know we talked about the holdover and wording, and that there maybe was discussion at the planning commission level about keeping that wording or not, but just still a little unclear on what the publicly owned and operated parks, parkway, or outdoor recreational facilities are.
I'm not sure, but at the time the planning commission put
Sure.
that in, they put it in every zoning district.
Sure, and I
Under
don't.
special permitted use. So I guess with the idea that if somebody had an idea for a park in their community, let's say, if you had a neighborhood and they wanted to put a community park in, they would come to the planning commission and get site approval for that.
Okay, okay.
Anything else? I make a motion that we adopt the presented amendments to zoning ordinance 165.
Support.
Motion by Mr. Weed, support by Mr. Cummings. Roll call?
Mr. Cummings,
Yes.
Mr. Nordine, yes. Mr. Palmer,
Yes.
Mr. Weed,
Yes, motion's passed. Resolution 2019-07, emergency closure of township buildings.
All right. At an early, I'd say late fall staff meeting, it was brought to my attention that in the previous 27 years, the township hall had never been closed. And so, it didn't matter the weather circumstances, township hall was open. And so, I reached out to several different surrounding, municipalities as far as what the emergency closure of the buildings. And this is modeled after a combination basically of Iosco County, Osable, and the schools. And so what you'll see in your packet is the Charter Township of Oscoda, the emergency closure chart. Usually the police chief gets in between 5 and 5:15 in the morning. If the roads are hazardous, then he would contact me to be able to understand the situation and the hazard to the employees to be able to come to work. I would confer with the supervisor as far as the seriousness of the situation, and if deemed appropriate, be able to close Township Hall and notify the radio station of the closure, as well as notify the executive secretary to be able to start the call tree. Basically, within this, we would be able to have the non-essential employees not report to work. And when I define the essential employees, the police officers is still coming, and DPW is still coming to be able to plow and salt appropriately. All the other employees would not be required to report to work. And obviously, that would not be a decision as far as I would not solely make that. It would be in conference with the police chief and the supervisor.
Comments?
You mentioned a radio station. I was just curious which, is there one or is there multiple? I mean, just curious. Yeah.
Yeah, the one that I see the most cancellations on is WKJC.
Yep.
That has the most on there, and that's where the other ones seem to be reporting as far as in their procedures for how they do this.
And you mentioned a call tree, which I'm familiar with. Are there risks to the call tree breaking down and people not knowing and trying to get to Township Hall only to find out it's closed?
So that's why we're starting to process early, and the police chief has both of my cell phone numbers, and knows to call. But basically, when we start that, the executive secretary would call the treasurer, the clerk, the DPW, the library, and the Old Orchard Park / OCC,
Right.
and they would go down from there individually.
So there's a plan to build that out as an addendum to this, so that there's a procedure.
Correct.
Okay, got it.
Call tree is not presented in here because it has personal phone numbers in it.
Right.
The structure is there though, correct?
The structure's on page 164 there, how that would work.
So I have two layers to my thoughts on this. One is a fundamental thought that I would prefer to not see the Township Hall formally closed. More, I would like to see it, us tell employees that they're excused. You are allowed to go home. You aren't penalized for not working, but we're not closing Township Hall. The concept of closing the Township Hall, limiting services for the day, is not ideal to me, and then paying personnel for not providing services to the community is not ideal. So, that being said, I want to preface that with I do put a high importance on employee safety. I don't want to risk anybody's well-being by requiring them to come to work. So that's where I say you are not obligated to come to work. We're not going to fire you under the circumstances. You're excused for the day. So those are my thoughts. Secondary to that, the call tree seems to be missing some departments within, like the zoning department, assessing department, water department.
So the water department, obviously, the F&V staff, they have their own procedures for how that works. And
Certainly.
if it's cold and a pipe bursts, that would be considered essential staff.
Yep.
So they they have their own procedures within the F&V, and you are correct, in the actual call tree, we do have the
Okay.
assessing.
But not in this overview structure.
Right.
Okay. Then the only other person I would mention is the new contracted utility billing clerk. Certainly, if Township Hall is closed, she's not getting in, I would assume. So we might want to notify
Sure.
her through, whether directly or through F&V. Yeah. And let them
let them
notify
know.
her. They might pull her to hush her. Obviously they would make their own call with their employee at that point.
Does she have access on her own? Okay, got it.
And the resolution doesn't speak to if an employee, like if the day is called halfway through the day, similar to what we experienced recently. So people who are there versus people who did not come to work that day at all, how those people are treated compensation wise. It's not covered in the resolution. It just seems to indicate that everyone would be paid a normal wage for the day. Is that the intended purpose, or if an employee doesn't show up to start the day, arrive at work, and the day gets canceled, are they going to be compensated for a full day of work without having arrived?
And we can further address that in the handbook. However, My thoughts on that is you gotta be there to win. So, obviously, if, like we experienced, and it was noon, and the police chief said, you need to start sending people home, it's getting treacherous on the roads. Those people that did report to work when it didn't snow, obviously, they will get paid for the rest of the day if we send them home and close Township Hall. If people call off for the day, then they're using their time.
Something, I don't have direct knowledge on this topic, so it's something that maybe you can reach out to Scott Moore and ask about how they handle it within the Board of Education. But I know that I've heard just recently, because of all the snow days we've had here in Oscoda, there seem to be some basic number of snow days that people get, like 6 days that they're covered. And then after that, they're not paid for those. Personally, I think that's a little bit difficult considering where we live. And I've been hearing about people's families who are under a bit of duress where they're getting paychecks of only 3 days worked. And that's really a tough thing. So I'm trying to figure out how to balance this out. No one is calling to God and saying, let's have a snow blizzard and let's not work for a week. But at the same time, I understand wanting to hold accountability and have a fair exchange for the money that we're paying our employees. But I also, on the third point here, I don't feel like it's right for us to be putting people in jeopardy to come to work just to get that wage. So I want to make sure that we consider these points as we create a policy.
And so, I can tell you that the way the school works, it's actually, the language is baked into the different contracts as
sure
far as
there
the
is.
exempt employees
Yeah.
versus the, what they would call the classified employees. And there are differences between that
Yeah.
based on the FLSA and those requirements.
Fair enough. I'm sure there's a place where it originates from, but I'm just saying we are our own entity here, and I just want to say what I said.
Is there a reason the sentence for them being paid is in this resolution?
Correct. This would be considered more generous than the FLSA standards.
Because if we had it in something in the handbook, so that we don't have it repeated in two different places, sometime later one changes and the other one doesn't, we end up with a conflict.
I understand.
That's why I didn't know if it was legally needed to be stated in this resolution or...
That is the guidance as far as this. This is not, this is more generous than what the FLSA standards would say. The FLSA standards say is that if it's an hourly employee and Township Hall is closed, they do not get paid for that day. That's why I want to be able to bring this to the Township Board. I do not feel comfortable going above and beyond
Yeah.
the FLSA standards without bringing it to the board for approval.
Appreciate that.
I liked your comment about your third point about if we don't pay, that almost forces somebody to put themselves in jeopardy.
Yeah. I don't like that feeling. At the same time, it does appear that, I guess the person I spoke to, that whose name I will not reveal, but it would probably be under one of those agreements. They have 6 snow days per year. After that, then they're simply not paid as well. So maybe there's a number that we can come to some agreement on as we put the policy together.
I can tell you these instances will be rare. This is not, obviously the school has experienced busing issues from
Sure.
the 136 square miles they cover. So it's a little bit different, the amount of children and the amount of people that are coming to attend class versus the number of employees. It's a little bit bigger scale than Township Hall.
certainly.
Yeah, your comments kind of changed my mind on a portion of that, so.
My only thoughts on that is you said that it almost forces people to come, that we're almost forcing them, and I think there is a difference between forcing them and almost forcing them. It is their decision. There's personal management of personal resources, times, different things personally that the decision is still held personally. We're not telling people you have to come. Certainly, there's a great incentive to come, that being a paycheck. And I certainly don't want to lord that over anybody. But there is a difference between forcing somebody to come and saying you have to be here to work, or you have to be here to work to get paid. So.
But we do need to kind of keep it even here. We don't need, I mean, if we're shutting it down, we're shutting it down.
That's right.
Not a thing of like, hey, if you can come to work, come to work. If not, then don't.
I-
Because then we'll end up in a disparity of certain employees say, well, I came to work and they didn't, but we're still getting paid the same kind of thing. And
I agree. If you're there, you get paid. If you're not there, you don't get paid. There's a stickiness to this situation. I certainly agree.
Well, I think it's a good idea to close Township Hall on certain occasions. Township Hall operates a little differently than the schools because the schools are looking out for the kids, and so they have closures based on temperature. I don't think the Township Hall would close because it's an extremely cold day where,
Right.
you know, kids, you don't want them out in, 15 below zero weather. I think the days that, we have these kind of snowstorms coming up, I think it's a good idea to close Township Hall so everybody's under the same roof that, because I was told by the state police some years ago that just because you're able to be out in it doesn't mean you should be.
Right.
And oftentimes, and I know, everybody up here has their four-wheel drives and can try and get, for a good part, get around in the snow. Doesn't mean you should. And I think if you set a resolution that says, when the police chief says, the state police have closed down some roads and they don't want you out there, that's a good time to close Township Hall. And I don't think we have any business going on at Township Hall on a particular day that the world's gonna come to an end if employees don't come in. And I think for everybody's well-being, to keep a level playing field and everybody on the same page, you close Township Hall, and then nobody comes in other than, essential personnel, like you stated. So I think it's a good proposal.
And I agree with that, and I do agree that probably nothing we're doing is so dire that we can't close the hall for a day. Where I get lost is then we're paying people for not working, and you're using taxpayer money to pay people to not provide a service.
We would have
I think
paid
it's the
them anyway.
liability.
We would have
for
paid
the
them, but they would have
employee.
put in 8 hours worth of work. We would have been getting something. We would have been spending the money on something.
Our employees are by definition employees, they're not contractors. So that's the difference. It's the liability, cost of doing business, I guess is the way to put it, but I okay, I said what I said. So do we need a motion on this?
yes,
Okay, so then I move that we approve the resolution number 2019-07, emergency closure of township buildings.
Support.
motion by Mr. Cummings, support by Mr. Palmer. Roll call?
Mr. Cummings,
Yes.
Mr. Nordine, no. Mr. Palmer,
Yes.
Mr. Weed.
Yes, motion's passed. Next, map rezoning revisions.
All right, so we had 2 rezoning cases at the most recent Planning Commission. The rezoning cases were reviewed by the Planning Commission December 3rd, 2018 public hearing, and again discussed and approved at the January 7th, 2019 public hearing. The proposed map changes rezonings were sent to the county for review and comment, and after a 30-day wait, there were no objections to the proposed map amendments. The case number 809, rezoning of 4385 Van Etten Dam Road. the mobile home residential district to R3 mixed residential district, and case number 839, rezoning of the Oscoda Beach Park and Village of Oscoda blocks number 4, 5, 6, and 7, and the township-owned property to the north of the beach park from the current zoning classifications of R4, high-density residential, and B1 central business district to RT residential tourist, and that is conforming with the surrounding area.
Comments?
That also conforms with our master plan as well.
The main thing that stood out to me when I was reading this and considering it is we've sat through the strategic planning meetings and talked about tying in the business district with the beach park. And there's been conversation in that regard. There's not really much decision made by any one body, but it seemed positively received, and changing from B1 away from that to forgive me, I forgot right now. RT just seemed, and I know that it's in line with the future land use map, but with recent decisions or recent conversations, it seemed opposite of where the recent conversations seemed to be trending or had.
As it relates to the B1 properties?
Yeah. Well, I mean, in recent strategic planning meetings, talking about tying in the B1 district towards the beach park to have the business district and the beach park, or the beach, I should say, not the park necessarily.
Well, for one thing is that any homes that are in the B1 districts are non-conforming, which puts a restriction on what they can do with their own homes if they're in the B1 district. So it actually frees up homeowners in the B1 district. If they're in RT, now they're conforming to that zoning district. If I were living in a home in the B1 district, I would want to be able to make improvements to my home without, having to come in and fight to get special permits and special permissions.
They have to go with
and maybe
zoning
get
board of
denied.
appeals
And maybe get
currently,
denied.
correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
I've noticed that before. I've observed that it wouldn't be fun to have a house in the B1 district.
Right.
I'm just so, and I'm not saying that we don't do this. But in the strategic planning discussions next time, if that conversation comes back up, this conversation we're having now in that meeting might help, because I've been sitting in meetings hearing people say, "Oh, pushing the B1 district, expanding it out towards the beach park would be a great thing," and everyone's, and it seems to trend that way. But maybe it wouldn't be such a great thing.
I don't think the comments have been extend the B1 district. I think the idea is to extend businesses towards
Okay.
the beach,
Okay.
not necessarily to have a B1 district. And what you're talking about is in RT, you would have those kinds of businesses that would extend towards the beach park.
Some, but not all. Correct. I mean, some businesses can operate in RT, but not all that operate
Well,
in B1.
there's quite a list, if you look at the RT thing, there's quite a list of things that are available.
Sure.
And especially then that are primary uses and special permitted uses.
Sure. Some, but not all. Correct. I mean, there's.
Well, it's difficult in the zoning ordinance to try and think of every business that might
Sure.
come up
Sure.
that somebody might want to introduce, and that's why they come to the planning commission. We take a look at it. If there isn't something there, we try and we'll actually make some adjustments to the ordinance so that they can. I mean, if it's a business that we feel is something
idea.
beneficial to the township, then we'll make whatever changes we need to make to the ordinance so that can happen.
Sure.
So,
Sure. And that makes sense. I just want to be, in my own mind, consistent in my decision making when I'm taking part in meetings and hearing people say, let's allow businesses to occupy that area, trending
Right.
towards the downtown.
Right.
And then when I'm making decisions here, I want to be considering what's being discussed there and I don't want to make diametrically opposed decisions where I hear this being said, it all sounds good, we're planning, we're doing this great initiative to plan, and then we're making decisions that don't match. And if that's the plan, I want to then have that discussion during the strategic planning meetings. I just want to be in
Right,
my own
but
mind.
you have to remember, make the distinction between businesses
Sure.
moving in a business district.
Yep,
So-
and
Big difference there.
I do agree, and that's what I think. Then we need to make that distinction in those meetings because I agree when I've said I maybe you've heard the reference to B1. I don't think anyone's been that detailed, but I certainly know that in discussions it's been the business district, and maybe it's just semantics that we need to iron out here. But when you say business district, I mean to me, and maybe it's because I'm more read the zoning laws more than most people that are in those meetings. I don't know, but you say business district, I think B1 or maybe B2 or B3, but I don't. Maybe they just say business district and they mean any business. So it might just be people are communicating on different wavelengths. But
I think so.
sure. Then I just want to make that clear that that's what we're intending to do. We're not trying to,
Right.
Anyone who is engaged in that meeting and heard business district and then says, what are those knuckleheads on the township board doing? Removing business won't be one, that this conversation at least was had to clear it up.
Yeah, the RT still allows a good number of businesses that would be appropriate in that area moving towards the beach park, so that takes care of that as well.
Any other comments?
The mobile home rezoning, that came before the planning commission over a year ago. The owners of the park came in and protested somewhat. We said, okay, we'll hold it off. They were talking about possibly selling the property. We held it off for a little over a year, and then recently, since nothing's happened with that property, and we're talking about the trailer park that's on F41 behind the party store there. The planning commission decided to go ahead with the rezoning, and they have the property for sale. Personally, my own personal opinion is I think that property would be more valuable with the rezoning, where someone could buy that property and put in some housing as opposed to mobile homes. There's no restriction in the law concerning eliminating. Now, there is a restriction in the law of eliminating a mobile home park if you don't have any other mobile home parks in your district. So if that were the only mobile home park, then we would be hard-pressed to do that rezoning. But we do have other mobile home zoning districts within the township. So we're legally, we're clear on this. Shouldn't be any problems with this, so.
All right. Go ahead.
Sorry. Has the attorney been involved at the planning commission level on this case?
Mhm.
I
Yeah.
believe so. Okay.
All right, I make a motion that we approve the map rezoning revisions.
Support.
Motion by Mr. Weed, support by Mr. Palmer. Roll call?
Mr. Palmer,
Yes.
Mr. Cummings,
Yes.
Mr. Nordine, yes, Mr. Weed.
Yes, motion's passed. All right, under other, Oscoda River Canoe Marathon.
Right, so, I understand the full-page ad historically, the, Township Board has approved to move forward with the full-page ad. It is under the $2,000 limit that I'm allowed to sign off on, but I have seen this in every board packet, so I put in the board packet for Township Board approval. That seemed to be the consistent practice as far as getting Township Board approval to be able to advertise a full-page ad in the Canoe Marathon booklet.
Any comments? Is there a motion?
I'll move to approve the Oscoda River Canoe Marathon ad.
Support?
Motion by Mr. Palmer, support by Mr. Cummings. Roll call?
Mr. Cummings,
Yes.
Mr. Palmer,
Yes.
Mr. Nordine, yes, Mr. Weed.
Yes, motion's passed. AYSO operating agreement.
All right, you will notice that this is very similar to the previous years. The dates have changed, and the agreement would span August through November. No other requirements within the operating agreement have changed from 2018.
Comments?
Yeah, just a couple typos in this thing I wanted to point out. So on page 3 of 5, item 15 is indented, and it shouldn't be. And then there's a blank page 5 of 5. So it's really only a 4-page agreement.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
My only observation of the agreement, certainly not crucial, is that section 3 point B provides for 2 porta potties for 2 months, but the agreement runs for 4 months. I don't know that it needs to be included in the agreement, but it was included in the first place. I don't know the distinction why it wouldn't just.
Because the AYSO season is actually only 2 months long.
Is it?
Yeah, they only play in September, October. I think that's as much as the league actually has.
Okay. And I mean, it's worked for this many years. I don't think
Yeah.
they're going to really, I mean, like I said, it's very
But the-
certainly not crucial.
But they're probably doing the
Legal
4
battle
months
over this.
because they need to set up the equipment and that. I actually don't know.
Sure,
I
yeah.
don't know why it's 4 months actually.
Well, I could see setup, painting the lines, prepping, but then between
Yeah.
practices and whatnot, starting before the playing season. Certainly don't think we're going to get into a legal battle over the requirement of the porta potties. It's just an observation that I thought maybe someone had a.
Yeah, there's the first soccer experience is in Tawas at their soccer field in August. It's around the second week of August. And then it breaks, then its school starts in September. That's when the soccer begins, and then it's October, and it's all wrapped up by around Halloween. So I think
Alright.
that's the reason why.
Good enough.
And when that wind is blowing through that tundra, I'm here to tell you, you'll want a porta potty.
Are there any funds being used in the transaction of this contract? Or is there any payment that they're making?
I did not see any consideration in here.
Okay. Is there a motion?
Yeah, I move that we approve the AYSO operating agreement for 2019 as is.
I support. Motion by Mr. Cummings, support by Mr. Weed. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's passed. Little League Operating Agreement 2019.
All right, again, this is very similar to the previous year. This agreement runs April 15th to July 1st of 2019. And beyond those dates, none of the other modifications have been made.
Comments?
And to answer your question, number 6 in there, there's no ownership interest transferring from the township to Little League as a result of this agreement. There's no consideration.
Yeah. Good. Right, I move that we adopt a Little League operating agreement 2019 as is.
Support.
Motion by Mr. Cummings, support by Mr. Palmer. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's passed. Sale of township vehicles.
All right, so in here we have, based on the most recent insurance renewal, we've gone through, Trustee Gajewski has spearheaded an initiative to be able to get vehicles that we no longer need, sold on BidCorp. And so this listing is the combination of Old Orchard Park and DPW as far as what needs to get put up on BidCorp. And we want to make the Township Board aware of what vehicles are going to be removed from the insurance and sold on BidCorp.
That's great.
Is this so we can avoid our own ordinance of junk vehicles? being on Township?
You'll see tow out on that 2005 Crown Vic, wrecked front end. I don't know who's going to bid on it, but nobody does, we can scrap it.
Wow.
Yeah.
From an insurance administration standpoint, is the intention of the board that I remove these and then we bid them out, or wait to remove?
No, we
remove
wait
the
and then
insurance?
remove.
Certainly,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
The way it
Keep
was
them short.
referenced laid out here caused me to question what the intention was.
Yeah, fair enough.
Is there a motion?
All right, I move that we sell the township vehicles listed on this handwritten piece of paper by Mr. Gajewski, I presume, on BidCorp, correct? That's right.
Support. Motion by Mr. Cummings, support by Mr. Weed. Roll call.
Mr. Palmer,
Yes.
Mr. Cummings,
Yes.
Mr. Nordine, yes, Mr. Weed.
Yes, motion's passed. All right, Chamber of Commerce Land Use. We have Art on the Beach, 4th of July Parade, the Hup Race, Blind Canoe Race, Northern Lights Parade, and Paul Bunyan Days. Does anybody have any comments or questions regarding any of those events?
No. Although it's a little scary for us to start thinking about Northern Lights in December already, but,
And focus on the 4th of July instead.
Yeah, I prefer to think about the 4th of July.
well, I'm just thinking about winter never ending at this point.
All right, I make a motion that we approve all 6 events that have been presented by the Oscoda Chamber of Commerce.
Support.
Motion by Mr. Weed, support by Mr. Palmer. Roll call.
Mr. Palmer,
Yes.
Mr. Nordine, yes, Mr. Cummings,
Yes.
Mr. Weed.
Yes, motion's passed. All right, now we're in our second public comment period. There is a 4-minute time limit. Anyone may speak. When you come up to the podium, please introduce yourself. Does anybody wish to speak?
Honey LaRich, Westwood Drive, Oscoda. On the topic that I talked in the first comment period, I was hoping that because my email had been distributed to the trustees, that it would have been added on the consent agenda. Since that did not happen, I want to make myself available right now if any of the trustees have a question about my request and need any additional information from me to process that request. I hope that you can share that with me as soon as possible. My purpose is to open the transparency between all the agencies, especially the Air Force and the DEQ and their relationship together. And I'm hoping that the township can assist and help the citizens to do that, because I believe that the Air Force is using the township as a pawn, just as they do to the DEQ, on how they delay certain reports to the DEQ. And in this case, they're using, I think, the township by an access agreement saying, well, they don't have to share it because it may violate the access agreement, or they just are delaying reporting it, because they have not reported those letters to the DEQ. And they're, under the dispute, they're holding the DEQ accountable to not release their electronic version of all their data until they have further discussions. So I'm asking for the township to do the right thing and share that information with us so we can try to break that hold that the Air Force seems to have. on transparency. I'm hoping that you don't have to ask me to submit a FOIA. I don't think for the purpose of these letters that that's necessary, but the timing is important. Senator Peters has requested the Air Force Secretary to send her deputy, Henderson, to Michigan, and that's moving forward pretty quickly. So that meeting may happen pretty soon. So we would like to have, when we meaning the, as the co-chair of the community RAB, I'd like to have this little detail researched, and I can share it with the DEQ and the governor's office as they're trying to put pressure on the Air Force, and also Senator Peters. So I asked for that information as soon as possible. And so if any questions, I've got a minute left in my time. Okay. Thank you. Oh, one last thing. I noticed on the end of the agenda, you have an informational thing about an EcoWatch article. And I noticed that that article came out the day after an MLive article by Garrett that I was quoted in significantly, I think, holding the Air Force accountable for not moving very fast, and actually I quoted as a slow boat to China. And I believe that I've found a possibility that they're even violating their own internal instructions. And so if I can verify that with the DEQ and the AG's office, then I hope that can break some of this. But we have to keep the heat on them because they're using Wordsmith as an example. DOD is, not the Air Force, this is DOD, is controlling the 12 parts per trillion. They do not want it to happen. So.
Thank you.
Anybody else wish to speak? All right, then we're on to board comment. Anybody have anything?
I do. I wanted to thank Kathy Westerbarth for her trip to Washington, D.C. I thought it was phenomenal. The press coverage I saw of it has been great. Your presence to the reporters was phenomenal. I think you did Oscoda a tremendous service.
Yes, thank you for that.
Yeah, I would agree. And just a comment that I had, I think as it relates to Mr. Roach's comments. Last week on Tuesday, Mr. Taser and myself traveled to Lansing to meet with some staff, the governor's staff. There were 10 other people from other areas around the state, and we were asked to come to provide input on the PFAS situation in our particular areas. Mr. Taser spoke about our difficulties in dealing with the Air Force and what he felt their responsibilities were. Our situation here is a little different in some of the areas downstate that were represented by some of the people there, around the Kalamazoo, Grand Rapids area down there, where they have contaminations that come from commercial businesses and that sort of thing. But at that meeting, I took the letter that I had from the Air Force that had those results of the testing on the wells on my property, and I did give a copy of that to the governor's office. So the governor is aware and has that information, which I would believe she would probably pass on to the DEQ, but I did provide them with a copy of that letter, so they do have that at the governor's office. The listening to some of the other people in other areas to understand their situation, there was a lady there, and maybe Bob can remember, I don't remember now where she was from, but Parchment, yes, thank you. Her and her husband had purchased their dream home down there, had some property, a small orchard, beautiful home. They had lived there for a number of years. He recently was diagnosed with liver cancer and subsequently died. Fairly soon after that, their wells were tested. Their wells tested at something like 40,000 parts per trillion in their drinking water in the well. Like I said, her husband passed away from liver cancer. she was tested and had a blood level, PFAS count in her blood of over 5,000. So, you know, we certainly have some problems here, but when you hear people talk about other situations, this is a gigantic problem, and we need to have something done. That's why I thought it was valuable that Mr. Taser and I went down and we were invited to meet with the governor's staff and talk about. We also had an opportunity to meet with Representative Aller just at a coffee shop. We were able to talk to her a little bit. But this is a serious problem all around our state. And then recently, it was last week again, there was, if you recall, at our last board meeting, we had a company here called Phoenix Pure that has a proposal to put some equipment in down at the dam site on Van Etten Lake to filter out the PFAS before it goes into the creek and subsequently down to the Oscoda River and into Lake Huron. And then there was a teleconference that I participated in with them and some other people from the community. One of the questions that I posed to them was, have they done any testing to know what the actual PFAS level is in the lake itself? And I have some reports of testing by both the DEQ and the Air Force at various sites around the edge of Van Etten Lake, where the ground interface ports are located, and they test those waters, and obviously that's where like I said, the water that was tested on my property was at a combined level of 5,600. So part of that water is going into the lake, part of it's going under the lake. But where it comes into the lake, if you're testing right where the source of the contamination is coming in, of course, you're going to have a fairly high level of PFAS at that spot. My question is, it's kind of like when I was a kid, we had a swimming pool, and you have to put certain chemicals in that pool. One of the chemicals we put in was muriatic acid. Now, if you pour the muriatic acid in and you test the water right where you pour it in, it would tell you, do not enter this water because it'll remove your skin. But then that's diluted by the gallons of water that are in your pool, and it makes it clean and safe. So what I've not been able to find is any testing of the lake out in the middle of the lake, in the upper portion of the water column, or possibly down by the dam where, you know, the water's coming through, where they're proposing to put this equipment to filter out the PFAS. Because the point of my question is, we need to know what the baseline is for the overall level of PFAS in the water to know whether or not their equipment is, what is exactly that they're removing. Now, is the overall level of the lake at 12 parts per trillion? And that's what they're going to remove? Or is it something higher than that in the overall lake that they would be bringing it down to near zero? And I posed that question in a teleconference so that they could look into that and see if they could find any testing that had been done of the water column of the lake itself out sort of in the middle of the lake. And I think that would be important information for people to have so that they know what the overall safety of the lake truly is, because so far the only testing that I can find that's been done, there's been testing of the foam. Obviously that's at very high levels because that's basically pure PFAS. They've tested at these ports around certain parts of the lake where the contamination coming in, and of course that's going to be high. So I would like to have somebody, Mr. Taser had made a suggestion to Mr. Jury one time that they go out in the winter and cut out a chunk of ice and have it tested. Well, I don't think that's been done yet. That might give us some indication. But that just something that I posed during that teleconference, and I would hope maybe Phoenix Pure could take that on themselves and get a baseline of what the levels of PFAS are in the overall lake and give us an idea what exactly they would be reducing from and to. So that was all.
Cool, yeah, and thanks for both of you going to that meeting in Lansing. I couldn't make it, but I did have a phone call with them the week prior, and let them know the reality of our situation here, because I think the feeling might have been it really can't be that bad from the Air Force and the DEQ. But I let them know it is really that bad. And not necessarily from lower level DEQ, but from upper management of DEQ. There's definitely been a block in helping to make progress in this remediation. Because really, if a good remediation system was put on Wordsmith, we wouldn't have to have a remediation system put on Van Etten Lake.
Right.
On Van Etten Lake just solves the symptom, not the problem.
I completely agree with that.
Anybody have anything else? All right, then I need a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
We are adjourned. Thanks for coming out.